The next panel has been arranged with 4 industry professionals to give advice and help you write your own RPG and know what to do from concept to delivery.
I'm Mark Rein-Hagen. I invented the world of darkness, Vampire the Masquerade, World of Apocalypse, Wraith, whatever. I've also come out with a new game called Democracy, a board game about politics, which is ties into my lifelong love of politics and being a speechwriter, and also have, as you saw the thing, I have a zombie game coming out, a new RPG.
I'm C.A. Suleiman. It can be fairly said that I have a career because of Mark. I'm a line developer. I do stuff. Mummy the Curse is the latest thing for...
Which is awesome.
And I've also written a bunch of books for D&D and other properties. Yep.
I'm Tobin. I work for Pelgrane Press as a project editor, so I do a lot of the layout and editing and kind of art direction for Pelgrane.
I'm Angus Abramson. I currently run a company called Chronicle City, which is a development house for role-playing games, as well as a publisher for games produced, developed by other companies and designers. Previous to this, I also ran a company called Cubicle 7 that dealt with third-party publishing as well as licensed and homegrown IP design.
So writing an RPG, we decided to divide this into the 4 main aspects of what it is like to write an RPG. And the first thing that I thought about is what happens when you have a concept. How do you turn that concept, that idea that could come out of anywhere, and make it into something that could be slightly playable. And after that, of course, you need to execute it. You need to turn it into a proper game, which is where CA is coming in. One aspect of RPG, both writing and publishing, that very, very often gets completely forgotten is the artwork commissioning and the editing. The editor are the unsung heroes of the RPG world. And if you read many RPGs that have been published, you can tell that they did not have very good editor. That is an incredibly important thing, which is where CAD comes in. And of course, once you have your game, you have 2 routes. You can either go and publish it yourself, good luck with that, great, well done, or you can approach a publisher, which is what Angus knows 1 thing or 2, maybe 3, we'll find out. But for now, we're just going to divide the time as evenly as we can. Mark, from concept to game.
All right, so let's fill them in, shall we? This is a rare example of the audience is ahead of the panel. But who here has ever, I forgot what my question was now. Who here has invented the world? Who here has had daydreams? Okay. So daydreams are how we invent worlds every day, because as a human, we're like a little homunculus in the brain operating the controls, like we're separate from the world a little bit. Our brain interprets the world before we even perceive it consciously. Okay, the brain basically is creating our vision of what the world is. If we expect something to happen, our brain expects it to happen. The latest studies in psychology are very, very clear that we're predicting the world before it even happens, and we're surprised when something doesn't happen the way our little world that we invented sees it. So creating worlds is fundamental to human consciousness, it's fundamental to human experience. And so creating a world should be the easiest thing in the world to do. But of course it's not. Creating a coherent world, a beautiful, self-coherent, sensible world is actually one of the hardest things to do. And which is why when someone achieves it on its own, like Tolkien, or with the help of many others like Lucas, when that complete world is created, we're drawn in like little flies to the zapping machine. Do you have those in the UK? Mm-hmm. Okay. A little zapping machine. I don't know, you guys seem so nice. I didn't think you would electrocute innocent insects, but anyway. Not a
Very gentle exposure to the UK then.
We not only do that, we have colour paper that sticks them so it dies slowly.
Oh, that is the torture of tortures, but as an American I should not talk about that. So the key thing about seeing and creating a world is, first of all, you have to see it. You have to visualize your world very well, and for me, I really believe in the process, the time between dreaming and being awake You know, I actually keep a computer by my bed, but it's high up on a thing, so I feel like a little kid when I'm typing. And I'll wake up from a dream, and I'll stand up, and I'll type, and my head just gets really clear, and I'll basically move from the dream into writing, and then go back to bed. You know, and for me, it's all these little tricks in which I use as a game player, as I'm gaming my own creativity. And I think that's part of the process of creating something brand new. And the other half of creating something brand new, of course, is that there have been times that you can go too far. You can create something that makes you really, really happy, but doesn't matter to anyone else. And so in creativity, you have to always ride that fine balance between your passion. Heck, it's not a passion, it's a fascination, it's a compulsion. But that thing that you see, that your vision you have to go for it, but you have to make it so that other people can see it as well. And in this way, world creating is like any other art form. It is a thing of passion, it's a thing of creativity, it's a thing of focus, and it's a thing of sociability, of seeing how your ideas can affect other people's minds for the better or for the worse. You have your choice. When you create a world, you can fascinate people, you can torture them, you can horrify them, you can make them feel the sense of adventure, you can make them feel a sense of romance. It's up to you. Of course, in my opinion, if you do all of those things, you've created a world.
Okay. So in terms of practical, if you wanted to make a game and have other people see it, I assume the focus here is the idea of actually getting it to people, yes, since we're talking about publishers. So once you have an idea of your concept, not all concepts translate very well or equally well to specifically the role-playing format. If you really want your concept to be a role-playing game and it doesn't obviously fit into it, the first thing you have to do is sculpt it so that it is a role-playing game. And the writing part, because there's a game element to it, I'd say the second step is thinking about your system, because there have to be mechanics to a game. It can be system light, it can be rules light, but you have to do a lot of cogitation on that marriage. That's the first right off the bat. If there's no way to express what you want the game to be, maybe it doesn't need to be a role-playing game.
They must be married.
Yeah, but if you can, then you decide, okay, this is how this is going to be a game, and this is what the experience of this world is. And then, you know, does the system you want to use convey that? And if it belongs to someone else, you're going to have to find a way to get permission to use it, unless it's an open thing. If you're creating your own, first off, there's a lot of work. But if you do want to create your entire own system, and you think it works for the game you want to make, then your writing needs to focus around that on the game part. But you know, there's a lot of different kinds of games. If your game is sort of like a storyteller game, you don't want the mechanics to be the focus. You presumably have a finite amount of resources, and that translates to writing, editing, you know, these costs that go into it. And so, yeah, you can write 700 pages and try and sell your 700-page role-playing game with a brand new system, but good luck. You know, it's a lot of upfront work. So you have to. That's the writing process. That's the design step. Is largely about budgeting. You say, I think I can do about this much. Here's what it should contain. You say, so this many pages on, you know, flavor. This many pages on the sort of lateral design elements. You know, your big groups or whatever. And this many pages on, you know, the powers or how these combat's going to work. You know, you have to put everything that the game kind of needs if you want it to be a standalone game. And if not, what is it in there?
Outline.
Right, exactly. A lot of people don't outline, and it doesn't usually result in the best products. It results in good ideas, it results in decent games sometimes, but if it's all over the place, then as a product that needs to be used, that people have to flip to and know where things are, it becomes less valuable as a product. But, so you have to get the writing done, obviously, before we can get to this step. But, you know, if you have a publisher in mind and that publisher likes the idea, then you can sometimes bypass, go right to Angus's step. And if they're behind you, then it becomes a different process. Steps 2 and 3 don't operate the way that they operate if you are entirely self-publishing. So they're two different things. I don't know how much time each of these steps has, but...
Keep going. How long, Tobin?
Okay. I can talk until these people...
Wait, I had wasted minutes?
No, you no.
Oh.
Don't worry, I'll come back to you.
So, yeah, outlining basically. Look at other games that you like. If something inspired you, even if it's not the same genre, look at how much they devoted to what, and think about what that means in terms of.
But do something different. Do your own world.
Yeah.
Don't copy. Copy the outline, but the contents of the outline have to be different. But
Right.
copy the structure, but do your own world. That's the great thing about our hobby.
And once you've done it more than once, it actually becomes part of the game. You metagaming the outlining process and saying this is part of how I'm saying what the game is about. You know, for me as a writer and developer, I know that word count is precious. That's my resource. Like the ability to do what I want to do in as economical a way. You know, one of my heroes is Ray Bradbury, and very few people wrote as economically as Ray Bradbury. He could give you a beautiful three-dimensional presentation with thematics and everything else in a few pages. And ideally, you should bring that attitude into your writing, because trying to sell someone 120 extraneous pages on something that isn't really what your game's about, well, wait for a supplement to do that. You know, you have to know what to put in the first presentation of the material. That is going to sell your game.
Publishers may pay by the word, but sorry, one thing. Publishers may pay by the word, but readers pay by the idea. If you don't pay off the readers, they won't keep reading.
Yep.
Give them what they want, and everything else will follow. Don't write by the word.
As a closing example, this game that I developed, Mummy the Curse, it's the latest World of Darkness game, and one of the comments we've been hearing since it came out, and hearing it a lot, is, wow, this book is chock full, or pick your expression, but that's what they're saying, is there isn't a lot of wasted space. I'm getting a lot of value for my money. There's a lot of ideas and a lot really work together well, and that's the best compliment really for a designer.
Cool. So, I mean, editing and layout is, it's obviously something that it's possible to do yourself if you're a kind of a design-y kind of person, or if that's where your interest or your talents lie. Or if you're outsourcing it to a company, then they will have in-house talent to do it. So a lot of what I tend to do is taking other people's words. So people who have had ideas, I will take that, and then layout of it is very, very, it's more important than you think, because everyone recognizes bad layout. You might not know what good layout looks like, but I promise you faithfully, you know what bad layout looks like, because you can tell it straight away. It's much more important than you might realize, because it's what people see when they get given your book. Yeah, so I mean, if you look at something like that, it's just very, very nicely structured. It's very, very nicely laid out. And as well, like following on what CA said, it's the structure of your book matters quite a lot, and how you put it together, how easy it is for somebody to pick it up and just start playing it in a kind of an intuitive kind of way. Like, you know, all of the character generation stuff should be together. It sounds simple, but I've seen examples where that hasn't been the case, and it makes it so much harder for people to actually pick up your book and do things with it. So layout, again, very, very important. In terms of the art, you need to have art in your book. The art can make or break it.
So important.
It's so, so important. One of our products that we've got coming up at the moment called 13 Page, everyone is just basically seeing the book and going, it looks gorgeous. And when people see a really gorgeously laid out book full of really stunning art, they really feel like it is worth the money, and it makes people happier about your product and more likely to say good things about it, to give it good reviews and stuff like that, if they can actually visually see where their money is going in terms of good art and layout. Art direction is something that you might have to do if you're not going through a company, which is a matter of kind of picking out the bits of your game that you think are the most relevant. So if you've got, say, an example of character classes, you might think that one of the character classes is just that little bit more glam than the other ones. That would be a good one to commission an artist to do a piece of art about. Equally, if there are really cool guns in it or something, you might maybe want to get somebody to do you a picture of this really cool gun. Just, again, pull out the most interesting things, the things that you really think people will seize on in your game, and make the art about that. You know, make the art kind of big, cool fighting scenes as opposed to a guy standing there going, I have a gun. You see, again, bad art is easy to see. But
Character art does not mean
so,
pillars of characters.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, it's not just characters standing there statically. It's active shots are always going to be much more interesting to your audience than just kind of passive characters going, "Look at me, I'm an elf." Whereas, you know, an elf kind of, I always think Legolas style, kind of coming down, shooting a bow, sliding down a banister, much more of an interesting art piece, and it's going to engage your audience much more. So that's kind of layout, art direction-y stuff. Is there anything I've missed in there?
Editing.
Editing, I mean, I think you've covered a lot of the editing actually. in terms of
Hire an
structure.
editor. That's what I'm going to say. Hire someone to edit
Yeah.
your work. Because
There-
I just
there
had
are
a mistake pointed out
professionals,
to me by someone, and I didn't like it.
Yeah, typos, nothing makes your book look
Yeah.
more unprofessional than
There's
a typo.
20% of the people who will notice, and they will tell everyone else.
Yeah, exactly. And point it out to you at every available opportunity.
And
as
editing
well.
is not that expensive a process, so
No.
the value that you get for a cleanly edited manuscript, if everything else looks good, you know, it's easily worth it.
Exactly, yeah. And find a kind of a style as well that you're, like we work a lot with a lot of American and British authors, so we have clashes between American English and British English, so spellings.
We
things
all
like
know
that.
which one's right.
Yes, we do in this country. So yeah, pick your style, stick with it. Be consistent throughout your manuscript, very important.
Yeah, one thing I'd add on to that is a number of companies, which if you're developing your own game, is probably worth doing as well, is actually have a writer's style guide or a writer's bible, which will cover things like what sort of spelling, you know, if you want it as American English or, you know, English.
American English
But yeah,
Should we leave?
because you know, with some of the games that I've been involved with over years, we've produced some games which have been, some of our Victorian era games, for instance, we've consciously made the decision to use British English in those books, even though we've got a worldwide market and a lot of our market will be for American sales, because it fits the product. Some of the licensed material we did with One Ring and Doctor Who, we used English as the British Queen's English, if you like, in the core books and supplements because it reflected the actual, the TV programs they were based in. There are a lot of the other games we do, we always use American English because obviously that's where the bulk of the sales are, and so we kind of flavour it in that way if there isn't a direct English. Also for art, something I'd also add is when you do your artworks, remember think of it as a photograph. It's a one frame click. Because I've lived with a number of artists over the years who are doing freelance, and some of the art briefs they got, you might be able to make a 3-minute movie out of it, but it wasn't a single scene because there was so much happening. And it was like, right, so we're doing a panoramic action flick, as opposed to a nice simple
A page of a comic book instead of one picture.
So so if you are deciding to do commission artwork, make sure you're concise. And also, there's nothing wrong with letting the artist play around with some of the ideas themselves, so you can give them the suggestion and a few hints, because often an artist left to their own right will come up with something a lot more visual than something that if they're working under a very tight direction.
You know what I do is I often will say, here's 7 ideas I like.
Yeah.
Use the first one and pick 2 others.
Yeah.
And so that way they can sort of fit to their, and then when you get to know an artist though, then you know their strengths. Oh, he's really good at faces. Oh, she's really good at costumes or weapons. And then you can sort of orient them that way.
As far as the actual publisher is concerned, if we are developing something in-house, again, it's a very different process it's not a very different process, but we go about it, obviously, from Mark's point upwards. For the products we publish on behalf of other people, so you've designed your game, you've laid it out, you've had it edited, you've got the artwork, and you come to us to print. There's a few things that I always look at and potentially get you to change once I receive it. Because whilst you have, you've poured all your labour, your words are lovely, everyone will love your game. The most important thing in your entire book at that point is your front cover. If your front cover does not appeal to people, they're not going to look into your book. They're not going to go any further than just seeing whatever it is on the front. If your front cover's great, then the most important thing is your back cover, where your sales blurb, not your sales blurb, but basically where you're telling people about what the game is, what it's about, what the world setting is, and give them a feeling of what they're going to be doing in the game, what the world is. So that is again is the most important thing. Every single step is the most important thing. Something that very few people actually look at, that again I think is also the most important thing, is actually spines.
I was just going to say,
Yeah,
the third most important thing is not what's inside.
Yeah.
It's the spine.
Because
the fourth most
basically,
important thing is the inside.
because basically a lot of shops are not going to be stocking your book face up because they haven't got the space. So a lot of people will just see whatever your spine is. And if you've got a boring spine, or even worse, a blank spine, in which case no one knows what it is, but if you've just got a very dull spine, it doesn't stand out. So basically, if you've got a thick enough spine where you can have a little motif or something that, or even part of a wraparound cover, it stands out on the bookshelf. That might mean that somebody will pull it out to have a look at.
So let me give you an example. On my I Am Zombie game, I'm going to do a spine that has the black and yellow like this, but only if you collect the full set of 10 books will you have the full stripes. If you put them in correct order, you'll have the full stripes. So this is a way to sort of make use of it. And if I was a clerk at a gaming store, believe me, I would make them all match because I'm compulsive that way.
And if you want a great look at spine, Shadows over Esteron, which I think are in the Kings, if you have a look at their book, they've got fantastic, they've got a really nice spine to their book. I know it's, they've got a lovely cover and everything else, but the spine stands out. Then, the most important thing, after you've got your wraparound, is basically just flicking through the book, is your interior artwork and layout at this point as well. Because flicking through, that's what's going to stand off the page. The words are not going to be the thing that sinks into your brain when you look through a book. It's pretty artwork and layout.
And the expense of color is not the expense of actually printing in color, it's the expense of buying pictures in color.
Yeah.
So think of ways in which you can still have mostly black and white art, but have a full color page. It's better.
When you're flicking through, the other thing is, because if you've got a very tight art budget, layout can compensate for that. Because if you've got an interesting looking layout, then you'll save a lot of money on art, because it still looks like, it's breaking up a page and looks visually attractive. Then, after all these other things that you as a writer have had no control of, the next best, most important thing is what you've actually written, because what you've written then inspires the people, after they've read it, to play your game, tell it to their friends, and then buy your supplements. So it's it's a whole process. Every single thing is the most important process, from front cover, back cover, spine, artwork layout, and the writing. And of course, for writing, you need a good editor to make sure that the writing's tight and can help inspire.
And if you don't have an idea, you can be a producer. Find someone that has an idea. There's many people who have great ideas who don't have a producer. You can be involved in this industry even if you're not the idea guy. And many people have made their livings doing this. Peter Atkins, who now is Gen Con, is a brilliant example of a brilliant producer who went out and found someone who had a great idea and turned that into a major company. So anyone can get involved. Who here has thought of, even once, of doing a Kickstarter campaign or Indiegogo? Okay, some of you. So that's an obvious way to get involved in the industry and start really small. But if you start small, remember that every customer you have wants to be pleased and they'll support in the future. So get editing and make sure distribution is correct.
Yeah. The other thing is, if you're going to self-publish these days, of course you don't have to go through a physical format, because electronic sales, PDFs and stuff, are actually a very good industry these days. And traditional publishers, as well as one-man bands who have an idea and put it together, you'll find that a decent percentage of your sales will actually come these days through electronic publishing. So, and again, on that side, then obviously your back cover text and your spine aren't so important, because obviously they're not going to be in any bookshelves. It's the way that you actually present the game on whichever sites that you're selling. So.
Any questions?
To help spark the questions a little bit, I'm going to put the panel into a bit of a hotspotting here.
Okay.
I'm going to ask a question that will roll over. Mark, can you tell us a bit about where the idea for I Am a Zombie came from, or what's been the development process of that idea as such?
Okay, so I Am Zombie is this thing I've been thinking about for years, and did the World of Darkness, and honestly, when I made Vampire, like the last month before it went out, I was like, oh shit, I better figure out what happens next. And I'd already figured out the schedule for Vampire. We're gonna have Chicago by Night, and then this campaign, and this setting, and this, and this. But I hadn't done anything else, and I realized people want to feel like there's a myth behind it. And so I invented this whole story of like, okay, next game will be werewolf, and then I just made it up in 20 minutes, and I typed it in, and it just sat there, and I didn't get back to it till the layout person was like, "Dude, this is what you really want?" And I was like, "How much time do we have till the FedEx gets here?" And then I just stared at it, and I fixed it, and I rewrote it, and that was it. So with I Am Zombie, it's like something I've been thinking of a long time, is that, you know, there's this whole thing about vampires are this creature we love when we're rich and doing well and everyone's posh. And zombies what we like when there's recession and everyone's not doing so well and we're bitter. And I've been bitter for a long time. So zombie has been part of me forever, and the creative process has been, you know, if I was turned to a zombie and I still had my brain and I could hide it, how would I live? And so for me, game design is a role-playing process. I literally think, if I was this, what would I do now? Which is the classic question of a role-playing game, isn't it? What does a game master always say in a role-playing game? What do you do? What do you do? That's the most spoken word in role-playing. What are you doing? What are you doing? So that's how I design. So this whole game is just based on me dreaming and thinking, and you know, mostly alone, what it would be like. And so that's why I think I do personal roles for, you know, games about someone who's going through something horrible. Is, first of all, I hated high school, didn't like college much, you know, people has always been difficult for me, but it's sort of how to be part of something and outside at the same time. I don't know.
So yeah, now imagine that Mark comes to you tomorrow and say, hey guy, I need a professional designer because you don't have anything. Or I have this idea, I have it all polished in my mind, I need a professional designer to execute this and turn it into a playable role-playing game that can be taken to an editor. What would your first steps be? What would you do next?
I would really get behind the impulse. Why does this person want to make this a game? Who's the target audience? You know, what is the tone the person is looking for? I kind of need to have a vision. You don't make the best stuff without kind of having a key thread line, you know, through line. And so knowing what it's supposed to be is the first thing before I could design it for them. You know, you could take an elevator pitch idea, 15 words, and do 100 different things with it. You know, you could do something that targeted children with it. You know, if someone came to me and said, I want to do a game about vampires where you play the vampire, I could do any number of things with it. So I'd have to first find out what really we wanted out of it.
But once you find out that, what is your process?
Well,
What do you do with Mummy?
yeah, it's a little different if it's my idea.
Okay.
So if it's my idea, like with Mummy, years and years ago, I developed another Mummy-based game for the classic World of Darkness, and that one was very tied to their ongoing metaplot. It was, you know, one of the last two games before it all came to an end, and so I had all of these sort of big story things I had to keep in account. But I remember toward the end of it thinking, I would love to do a role-playing game that's more about the classic Mummy. Just like, for example, what Mark did with Werewolf, you know, whatever else it was definitely an alternate take. It wasn't the classic werewolf myth. It was, you know, this sort of weird kind of natural eco-warrior type things. And so somebody might have had, you know, I'd like to see a Lon Chaney Wolfman game. So that's where it started, was me wanting to do a game about mummies the way that, you know, they've kind of been for us, and not specifically the World of Darkness metaplot mummies. And after that, it was purely about what I wanted to say, as silly as that sounds. I couldn't write a word until I knew what I wanted the game to actually be about. Now that's kind of advanced design theory stuff. You don't have to do that with every game you want to play. But for me, it was, how can I do all of these things at the same time? Multi-tiered design. which is not what everyone wants.
And if your game doesn't have multiple tiers, then maybe it's not good enough yet. A good game should have at least 5 levels, I think. 5 things that it appeals to different people and levels of how to see it, you know, like any good play or movie. Multiple levels is important. A lot of beginning designers think, oh, it's a superhero game with Nazis. Okay, that's maybe 2 levels. Actually, it's 1.
Yeah.
What are the 4 other levels?
Yeah. What else is it? What's to it?
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the other things I'd also add to that is if you have a design brief to start with, there's going to be a lot of back and forth between the design team, maybe the publishers, if it's something that the publisher is going to be doing. And certainly you can see the nucleus of a game possibly change and expand out with the ideas that are brought to it. Because I won't go too much into examples, but I remember when both Changeling and Wraith were originally being developed, and the initial design specs on those are actually very different from how the game originally
Shush!
So, but yeah.
Ignore the man behind the curtain.
In Vampire Masquerade, Wraith was originally going to be called Ghost, for instance. You know, it was actually published.
That is
first edition, it was going to
speculation.
be
You
Ghost.
cannot prove
I have
that.
it black and white in my copy. But the thing is as as things develop, they can change and morph into something else. And you should never be afraid to have that back and forth between the design team and the publisher, to see how the ideas come through.
Creativity moves.
Yeah.
Keep up with it. Don't stop it. Don't ever stop creativity. Just follow it eagerly with gratitude.
So once we have that, okay, we have I Am a Zombie as an idea, we have the mummy already written. Kat, where do you starting? How do you approach it? What should people expect from you as an editor? What happens?
Well, basically, once we receive a document in, I mean, the first thing to kind of do is to read through it. Basically, just read the thing, work out kind of what it is, like as these two have already said, what it is that people are actually trying to say in this game, and how effectively it is they're saying it through what the words that they've actually put on paper. And then once you've got an idea of what the game is about, then you can start to go, well, what is important? What is important to have in this document versus what's just some interesting flavor that the authors put in there that maybe doesn't sell the product to the audience the way that they think it will. So once you've got the whole thing, then you need to start looking at what should be in there and what shouldn't, and paring it down so that, and again, sometimes it's nice to have kind of a lot of volume in a setting, and it can make it feel deeper and more special. But in a lot of cases that I've seen, the situation has been that the author, especially if it's a newer author, has put in more than needs to be in there, and it'll need to be kind of pared down a bit to actually just get it into a tighter kind of a.
Absolutely, and you want to have simple things first, and then explain it in stages.
Yeah, exactly.
But how you present it is very important.
Yeah.
I always think when I'm running a game at the Star Wars intro with the words coming up, I mean, I'm thinking, okay, what are my Star Wars words?
Exactly. What's your elevator pitch, and then how are you kind of expanding on that elevator pitch in the actual game structurally? I think is quite important.
You know what I call that phenomenon?
What?
Literary elephantiasis. A writer, and then eventually he hands the whole thing over, and it's like pages, and you say, well, this is extraneous, this is unnecessary. They do it in film all the time because you have to get to the essence of a scene quickly, especially Hollywood format, which isn't necessarily something to be defended. But, people respect their time, basically.
Yeah. I think the other thing is, for instance, the 700-page opus that you've just created that was mentioned earlier on. The 700-page opus, realistically, that's just going to put people off ever touching it because they'll look at it, it's going to be so big, you're not going to sell very many copies. Whereas if you broke it down to smaller books, not only would you have a tighter, better edited core book, you've also probably got enough information in there for the first 4 supplements. So it immediately makes it into a line. It's better for people to be able to pick up and digest, because if somebody gave you a 700-page book, you're not going to read it rarely would you read it cover to cover as a role-play game. Obviously, fiction is different. Yeah, George R. Martin and everyone else. Yeah, we go through the pages and pages religiously. But as a role-play game, it's very doubtful somebody would spend the time reading every page of a 700-page rulebook. And also, it certainly wouldn't attract new players if you suddenly gave them this, kind of massive tome. Whereas being able to break it down into smaller, concise books on particular subjects enables you to, it actually, you end up lapping up, and you might end up still reading the 700 pages, but it feels like a lot less because it's been broken down into the individual books and subjects.
I have an anecdote on that. I wrote this sort of the next wave of Vampire the Masquerade is called Vampire the Requiem for the New World of Darkness, and that was, I think, 288 pages, not huge, including a lot of very pretty art and full-page art pieces. And for a good year and a half after it came out, I kept running into the problem where people just hadn't read it. It had been out and they were using it, but it was a lot of sort of inference, it was a lot of assumption, and saying, well, it's just the next edition of Vampire. So you're going to run afoul of a lot of laziness, basically. And so you either have to roll with that and make it attractive and engaging, or you have to answer a lot of questions and address misconceptions and tell people you haven't read the book.
So, questions for the audience, please. Go ahead.
Okay. I've been semi-developing a core system just for my group of friends, not really going to get it out there or anything. I've got two different, very, very different battle systems in it. Would it work if I actually did decide to go further with it and go to actually getting it out there? One is more of an army battle system, the other is on the ground, single units, two very different systems.
Do they scale? Do they scale in any way? So, for instance, are the systems just two very different systems?
Yeah,
or
the person who is in the single is the commander in the army system. So they will have this. So they will be working on both sides of the system.
Well, there's an old war game called the Dragon Pass, which is a classic game where you actually have these superheroes who are in this Bronze Age battle system. One guy can equal an entire army, and so I think you can unite them that way, which I think fits a fantasy world very well. But to actually combine a melee system with a battle army system would be, it seems like a stretch to me. But if you could make it work, congratulations.
Just to interrupt there, something similar at the moment has been recently brought out with a remodification from Pathfinder. They've got the basic and the mass battle systems. I think they've recently brought out Ultimate Campaign, which has got a errata on the rules system, which was introduced in an adventure camp called Kingmaker.
Right.
So you might have to have a look at them and see how they compare.
Something that I would say as well is playtest. Yeah. Playtest. If you are interested in actually getting your game out there, get other people to play it and ask them ask them what they think of it, what works for them, what doesn't, and incorporate that feedback into it. Make edits. The game that you've got done already is not going to be your final game. It shouldn't be. There should be an evolution process in it where people's feedback should kind of feed into your design and how things work. I mean, for the hobby, I think playtesting is very, very important.
My in-house playtesters for Vampire and my anonymous playtesters at a convention both told me this idea will not work. You must change everything. It's a terrible game. And what are you thinking, you idiot? You need character classes.
And sometimes you just can't listen.
And sometimes you have to stick by your guns. But.
Yeah.
There's another question. Yeah.
Yeah, this is about law, basically, of your idea of getting up in the middle of the night and writing down whatever you saw, milking the muse in your dreams. I think Neil Gaiman once wrote that the weirdest and the best dreams don't really make good storytelling. What do you really get out of that?
I mean, what I get is not a story ever. No. Dreams are not stories. What they are is they're keys to stories. And if you use that key of that dream, that weird dream, where the weird lady in the white with the blue halo and the cat eyes told you, find your grandfather, okay? I take that key, I unlock it, and I go, well, if that was the story, what would it be? And then I'm conscious, I'm awake, no coffee, and then I just type something. And then in the morning, I look at it and I go, oh, gee. But every once in a while, I go, oh.
Very good, thank you. Yep.
So what's it take to turn a game world, sorry, a fictional world into a successful game setting?
Luck.
No! Genius! No. It is luck. Like last session I mentioned that if Ravenloft hadn't come out in the D&D world just before I came out with Vampire the Masquerade, I don't know if Vampire would have succeeded. It prepared a lot of people for that next step. You gotta, and I think a large part, Rich Thomas, who now does all the publishing at Onyx Path for the World of Darkness, he always said, Mark, you have a really good sense of timing. You always seem to know the zeitgeist. And I must admit that I spent a lot of time keeping up with what people are watching, with pop music, the movies. Even if I don't like the movie, even if I don't like the pop music, I still listen to it, I still watch it. Because I want to sense where the whole tide of culture is going. And you may think that the geek world is separate from that. We're not. We're the stones in the front of the tumble, in front of the avalanche. We're the little pebbles in front. But the avalanche is pop culture, and we're the leading edge of it. And so to see where it's going, you got to watch everything.
I was going to say, I didn't think that Justin Bieber song I found on your iPad was actually your daughter's. I think that's a very valid point, actually, because one of the things that I've done numerous times is if there's a best-selling book, for instance, Twilight. I've read all the Twilight books because they were. I know it was primarily because they're such big sellers. What makes them get that connection with people who are going to buy? And you need to kind of like, sorry,
Adolescent girls.
Wouldn't it be great if gaming was if a lot of adolescent girls thought gaming was the #1 thing? That would be great for the hobby.
It is.
You know, and
It is the #1 thing.
well, gaming. Hazana!
No, one of the
Because where girls go, boys will follow.
One of the biggest things for a lot of games is just getting the exposure out there and people playing them. Because especially, if people get a chance to do role play, generally speaking, they will actually like it and continue to play. But at the moment, especially in a world which is dominated by so many other things vying for people's time, and certainly now in the world of kind of like Xbox, iPads and everything else, there's a lot of other avenues that, as a young gamer, you might end up traveling through instead of finding role-playing games. And one of the big things with role-play is a lot of it is either word of mouth because a friend plays, or you stumble across it at a shop. Now, game shops are far and fewer between now than they were when most of the panel were growing up.
The golden age.
Bar Cat, because she's still young. Kind of like it's harder to actually come across and find games. And I find that a lot of people, if you introduce a younger audience to gaming, and you've got an interesting adventure, a good games master, they can get really, everyone can get really involved with it, enjoy it, and that can be the start of a brand new hobby that could last decades. Sorry, Taco.
No, that's right.
Okay.
So if I have a new role-playing game, 5-minute character creation. I believe in this because I think that we should reimagine what role-playing can be. And I hope that only one of the game designers that does that. I hope everyone thinks ahead and thinks how to bring in new people. If we keep appealing to the people who already are playing or already invested in a system, then new people won't come into the game. And we got to think to those gateway games, and we need to think about gateway role-playing games. So anyway, come find me, 5 minutes, I'll make a character with you, okay?
We have time for another couple of questions. Yeah.
I was going to ask, following on from the earlier point, there was quite a good follow-on question to that. How would you say you sort of get the right balance? To some extent, the role play shouldn't tell the whole story. It should also sort of be a gateway to the story. So how do you get that balance right of giving something but not giving too much sort of?
Yeah, you know how in movies they have those shots where all you know is the vampire castle, and the shot is in the valley looking up at the castle, and it's a gloomy castle with clouds running by. And then it sort of takes a bird flying towards the castle and spinning around. Then you see the window, and it jumps to the window, and then you suddenly see the girl. She's looking in the mirror going, "Daddy, Daddy, it's my birthday, but my dress is terrible." Okay? That was like the setup of that scene that a movie did. Well, you have to kind of do the same thing with a role-playing setting and system. You have this beautiful interaction where I believe that when they make the role, that role is helping them imagine the world, not taking them out of it. I think a lot of role-playing games, when you make a role, you're out of the world. You're not in the world anymore, you're out of it. And I think the best games are ones where you make that role, it's pulling you into the moment, into the scene.
So yeah, what's your take on that?
It's spot on. I mean, it's one of the challenges to me is understanding how to, I mean, I mentioned earlier, respecting people's time. Well, to me, that's actually what it all comes down to. When you actually get together with your friends, and it's not, even if it's a Skype thing, Google Hangout, you're actually there and you're socializing. And so if you're really good at it, you can deconstruct every part of that experience, and you can make a role-playing experience, really entertaining every moment, just like really good films. Like, there are Peter Jackson films that go by like that, and then there are 82-minute sci-fi originals that is, So you can do that with role-playing experiences too. And 6 hours in a session goes right by because every scene is engaging and thrilling and hopefully meaningful in some way.
One last question? Yep.
You were talking about how people get introduced to games by going into shops and how it doesn't happen so much anymore. Do you feel that to an extent the internet has replaced that, and that's changed the kind of person who gets into role-playing games as a result?
One of the problems I've got with internet being the gateway into the role-playing community is the internet. You'd have to look specifically for forums or people to be able to start. You've got to have that initial seed of interest to go looking for it, because you're not just going to stumble upon. Well, very unlikely just stumble upon it randomly.
Can I say though,
yeah.
With the internet, it doesn't have to be forums that can do it. One of the things, I got introduced to the world of darkness through videos done by Matthew Dawkins, the Gentleman Gamer, on YouTube.
Yeah.
He introduced me to the law. He was doing videos on law for vampire.
But why were you watching those videos in the first place? What attracted you to the Gentleman Gamers?
Originally, I'd found him when initially I'd been looking for a Pathfinder campaign video.
Yeah, but that was still, you found it through a role-play element. True. So how did you originally find role-play to start with?
My dad introduced me
to
it. I've initially introduced a few people since then.
Yeah. Yeah, see, the thing with a lot of the games is how we can find that introduction from somebody who has never played a role-playing game before, and that is a lot harder on the internet, because, like I say, if you don't know what role-play is, you're unlikely just to randomly stumble upon it for the first time and then find people who you can actually play with. The only way of doing that is if you're into kind of comics or science fiction, fantasy, etc., and you've got a site that you follow it, and that starts covering role-playing games, so you actually learn about it through kind of news commentary or reviews of a product, then you can find through there. The same as if magazines, like if SFX magazine covers a board game or a role-play game, it opens it up to a wider community that wouldn't necessarily have come across it, which is also something to a certain extent why conventions like UK Games Expo is very good, because they bring in a much wider audience than normal just core role-play games do, because you've got a bigger family audience here.
Or if a better company owned the movie rights to Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, well, that's not always the case, because, for instance, Mutant Chronicles was turned into a movie a few years ago, and I doubt anyone discovered the Mutant Chronicles games through the actual movie. And like you say, with Dungeons and Dragons movie, how many moviegoers would be be inspired by watching the Dungeons and Dragons movie to go out and find a game. But,
The truth would be revealed. We'd be screwed.
As I say, give a better company.
There's certainly, I think, what would you say was the best? I know you'll say Kindred. Would you say?
No, I hate Kindred. I'm so upset. Don't even mention that. My friend died. The thing failed. It was a terrible show.
For those that don't know, Vampire Masquerade got turned mid-90s, I guess, wasn't it, into a US TV series called Kindred of the Embrace.
It got me a career in Hollywood. I wrote scripts for a long time. I made a lot of money, but it got me into Hollywood, which was my lifelong dream. And as soon as I got to Hollywood, I was like, oh, I don't like Hollywood at all.
but would you say that brought a new crowd to Vampire Masquerade? Or don't
I mean, two of the writers for my show went on to Buffy.
Yeah.
Buffy grabbed it, and then True, and all these different movies, TV shows now have come out, which obviously borrow from the world. So it's sort of like, I sold out just 3 years too early. It would have been, it's a timing thing. Everything's timing.
Yeah.
You got to know the zeitgeist. Start listening to who's Britney Spears' guy?
Justin Bieber, isn't it?
Oh, I can't do it though. I know that's the one I don't listen to.
Right, thank you very much. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for, which is we need to set up this for the movie later. But the three gentlemen and the lady are going to be around, so please do feel free to grab them. Seriously, not very often you're going to get a chance to talk to proper professionals out there, and those four, I think, there's no doubt they seriously are. So do talk to them and do a little bit of ego massaging, which is always very nice and very well deserved. So thank you very much, guys, for being with us, and thank you, audience, for being here. Thank you.